Hi, this is Caterina and Giovanni, and we'll talk to you about Irish English and its main varieties. So let's first have a look at a real taste of Irish English.
I think since the riots took place, I think it's kind of been a bit. You could sense that there's something different in the air, but I think since then it's kind of gotten back to what it was like beforehand. Right now, walking down the streets, I feel fine, but that's me as a guy. I think as a girl, it's completely different. And to be honest, it was even before the riots. So yeah, right now I feel safe because there's a lot of people around. But if it was quiet, I think that would be a different story.
And how do you think things could improve?
More Gertie. Simple as more Gertie. And I would just be walking around anytime and there's no Gertie there. No Gertie anywhere. And even though, the Gardaí had promised they were going to be more so on the streets, well, over Christmas, yes, they were. But now they're not. It's back to square one again, and it feels like anything could happen. I think...
Now let's have a look at some Irish English slang. So what's the crack means what's up, and it's been donkey's years means it's been ages. While, for example, stop the lights means, are you serious?
Expressions like on the lush means, are you drunk? Sucking diesel means that after a period of difficulties, you're starting to figure something out. And sham just means hi pal, hi guy.
So according to the Constitution, the official language of Ireland is actually Irish, but this does not mean that Irish is the most used language. Indeed, the most used language is English, and it is recognized as the second official language. Although there is no codification of Irish English, so it's a different concept than the standard American English instead that we have. So the written standard, the spelling, and the dictionaries that are used in Ireland are the ones that are used in Britain. Irish English can be considered as the oldest of the overseas varieties of English, and it has links to both different dialects of British English and Scots, and the Irish language, as we will see with its history. So let's have a brief look at the history of Ireland in order to understand how English became the main language spoken in Ireland. We have to go back actually to 1171 with the first arrival of the English and the arrival of King Henry II, who thought a sort of bloodless campaign and really wanted to tie relations with the Irish elite and made sure that there was an Irish interpreter so that this Irish elite knew what they were saying and understand fully what they were doing when pledging their loyalty to the king. The settlers that came from the mainland were coming both from Wales and from the Midlands of Britain, so there were different dialects that were coming to the island, so we cannot really say that Irish English imitates one specific dialect, because there was a mixing. There were people with very different backgrounds. So in these years, there were two societies that were still kept separate. So the native Irish people who kept on speaking Irish and the English. While with the 15th century, we have the first real try to make English become the main language with the Statutes of Galway, where English became the language spoken in Parliament. However, we have in the 15th century a society that is divided in three parts. So there are the native Irish speakers, the Anglo-Irish, so the people who first came to the island but that were not as loyal to the king as the king wanted them to be, and instead preferred to make ties with the local authorities, and then a much smaller group of loyal colonial presence, loyal to the king, and that spoke English. Well, with Henry VIII, Henry VIII really started to fight Gallicization, And the laws that he tried to enforce were actually ineffective because he wanted people to speak English and by that show their loyalty to the king. But that didn't really happen, and in the markets he wanted people to speak English or speak Latin if other people didn't know English and not speak Irish to communicate with them. Well, the one thing that was actually effective was changing the constitution, and Henry VIII broke the ties between land ownership and having hereditary title. So the titles were actually given by the new king, and so the Gaelic lords as well gained Irish titles, which means that they could be in parliament and they were allowed to speak Irish in parliament, but the point was that of creating a political order that was under British rule. So Henry VIII is crowned king of Ireland, while before he was only named the Lord of Ireland. But the Anglo-Irish were really starting to be bilingual, and most importantly were using Irish when speaking among themselves and speaking English when they were speaking to foreigners. So we still have a pretty divided society in terms of language. So in the cities, in the main cities, in the main towns, people would speak English, but they were usually bilingual and they knew how to speak Irish to their neighbors, while for the rest of the island, Irish was the most used language. With the 17th century, particular mention is given to the plantation of Ulster because of the importance for linguistic reasons. So there were settlers coming from Scotland, and so giving their own Scottish dialect to this area that was pretty isolated actually at the time because of an Irish belt, right, that was given, that was right under it, so they were isolated in their own variety. And the plantations that were of Catholic people was actually confiscated, for example, at the time of Cromwell, and it was given to English people that were loyal to him. So the more plantations there were, the more the English language started really spreading. So again, we have this general state of Ireland as a place where in the cities English is spoken and there is, however, bilingualism, while outside Irish is still spoken. But we also have a decline of the Gaelic high culture and a spread of English as an everyday language. So in 1801, we have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, the establishment of this, and there was a rise in the markets of the use of the English language, and there started to be really a bond connecting the English language to material well-being and prestige, but also more economical advantages if you knew how to speak English. And in the hedge schools of the 18th and 19th century, they were speaking Latin, Irish, and English, but there was much more literature available in English, so and much more teachers who knew how to speak English rather than Irish. So the English language actually spread also through schools in a more or less natural way. And with the Great Famine of 1845, it also was a moment that had effect on the language because it hit particularly areas where the Irish language was spoken as the native language. And so this whole group of people who knew how to speak Irish died because of the famine. So English was more and more connected to well-being, material well-being, but also it was an advantage to speak English because you could move away to colonies, whether it was in the North America, and speak English. So there were a lot of advantages given by this language. While when we come most recently, so to the 20th century, after the War of Independence, fought between Ireland and the UK in 1919 to 1921, with the constitution that we saw before, in 1937, the main language that they decided to adopt was Irish. And this wasn't because of a link to a Gaelic past, but it was Irish as a symbol of patriotism and nationalism, also because of the word that they had just fought. But English, however, was still the more widely used language, and it had no need to be protected in any way. And the first ideas that they have about English in the 20th century was of a language that Irish English was an imperfect variety of English. It was an imperfect grasp of English. It was mispronounced because they were looking at the norm, and the norm was Britain, and they felt like their language was so different, and it was lacking in a way, even if we know that linguistically this has no meaning. So English has no link to a glorious past, but is nonetheless in no need of protection because it was very much used, and it still keeps on being very much used. And so we'll have a look at how much Irish is spoken today.
Okay, we've looked at the history of English in Ireland and at some attitude towards the language, but let's now look at what Stephen Dedalus has to say. Well, first of all, Stephen Dedalus is the protagonist of Joyce's novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, but I won't focus on the details of the novel. The only important thing to know is that Stephen is an Irish young man, and in this passage, he's having a conversation with the Dean of Studies, who happens to be an Englishman. And when the two are talking, Stephen instinctively uses a term of Irish origin, and the Dean cannot understand it. And so Stephen goes on a rant in his mind about language. So he says, "The language in which we are speaking is his before it is mine. How different the words home, Christ, ale, master are on his lips and on mine. I cannot speak or write these words without unrest of spirit. His language, so familiar and so foreign, will always be for me an acquired speech. I have not made or accepted its words. My voice holds them at bay. My soul frets in the shadow of his language." So what Stephen does here is describe English in a contradictory way, because it's something both familiar and foreign. It's familiar because he speaks it every day, but it's foreign because it comes from another country in the end. And so it's the acquired speech imposed by the colonizer onto the Irish people. Some scholars disagree, however, and think that this approach might be too simplistic, but just don't tell Stephen. So here we can see a strong element of patriotism and of love for his language, and the very important idea that Stephen simply cannot make English his own language. But as Caterina rightly said, Irish is Ireland's first language, and English is just Ireland's second official language. But when it comes to the number of speakers, it's clear that English has prevailed. So let's just take a look at some figures which show how many people in Ireland today can actually speak Irish. Statistics suggest that about 40% of the population aged 3 or more can speak Irish, but there is no actual reference to the level of mastery they have in the language. But when looking at the graph on the left-hand side, we can actually see that 60% of the people who participated into this survey cannot speak Irish well at all. Then, if we look at other figures, we can see that women appear to be more confident with the language than men, and in fact, 55% of the people who participated into this study were women. But again, only a tiny portion of them can speak it well or very well. What is perhaps most surprising is the fact that 67% of people aged between 6 and 9 can speak Irish. This is especially surprising if we think of the relationship we might have in Italy with dialects, which are usually spoken more by the elderly. There also seems to be a link between geographical area and speaking Irish. As a matter of fact, Irish is most spoken in areas like Galway and Clare, but there are also areas where Irish is not spoken a lot. Dublin is one of them, and it has the lowest proportion of speakers. Some scholars have suggested that the level of the command of the language might be linked to a level of education, a higher level of education, but this does not seem to be the case really, because again, this survey suggests that of people aged 15 and over with primary education, 17% of them could speak Irish well, and 11% very well. But then people with secondary education claim that they can't speak Irish well. That's true of 69% of them, which is a lot. And finally, people aged 15 and over with third level education, say 27% of them can speak it well, and 10% very well. So we can safely say that as far as languages are concerned, the Irish definitely feel more comfortable speaking English rather than Irish, at least in the majority of the cases.
So Irish English, as we said before, has been spoken in the island for at least 500 years. So we do have different varieties. There is Standard Irish English. Even if I told you that there is no codification of Irish English, we still can talk about a standard variety. Then there is Dublin English, that is spoken in the area of the city of Dublin. Ulster English, that is spoken in the Ulster area, so in the north. And Southwest and West Irish English. In this presentation, we'll focus on Standard Irish English, Dublin English, and Ulster English. Let's have a look at the phonology of Standard Irish English. So first, an overview. Irish English is rhotic. Irish English makes a distinction in labial-velar fricative, so the sound oo, and hue, so which, for example, even if this distinction appears less and less with younger generations. There is no H dropping. So the H at the beginning of words is pronounced. There is little yod dropping. So, for example, words like music, cute, few, you can hear the glide, but there are exceptions. So, for example, with palatal-velar consonant and fricatives and liquids. So, for example, Tuesday is pronounced Tuesday, and we have sut and assume. They don't make a distinction between clear and dark L, so we have milk. And vowel length in Irish English, apart from the areas where there was influence of the Scottish English, is southern, so length and quality usually go together. Consonants?
Let's now look at Irish consonants. One aspect you may be familiar with is the Irish pronunciation of the TH sounds, and that is dental fricatives. These are the and the, voiceless and voiced, and these are pronounced in a very different way from standard British English. In fact, these sounds rarely occur, but this again depends on the speaker's age, and some linguists argue that this phenomenon might actually be dying out. So in Irish English, they are both pronounced using dental stops, thus neutralizing the phoneme contrasts between these sounds. Therefore, words like thin would be pronounced as tin, and words like they would be pronounced as they. But let's stick to the pronunciation of T sounds. Speakers in Ireland, as a result of influence from other English varieties in today's globalized world, might decide to pronounce the letter T using a voiced tap, as in Standard American, for example in leather or out of, or as the glottal stop that we can see here in getting, and little. Others may pronounce it as a fricative, and there are also speakers who may pronounce the T sound using H as an allophone of T, as in leherj. And here there's also another phenomenon, but we'll look at that later. But again, bear in mind that this depends on the speaker's age and also on proximity to rural areas. As far as the voiced velar nasal, that is the NG sound, is concerned, it is also realized differently. By the way, this is the sound we can hear in progressive forms like listening. In Irish English, this NG sound is pronounced as N, so listening. And then there is a further aspect which definitely shows the influence of Irish on the language, on the varieties of English spoken in Ireland, and that is the palatalization of S and Z to the postalveolar fricatives sh and j, again voiceless and voiced, and this can occur in stop, which becomes stop, stick, which becomes stick, and sleep, which becomes sleep. But it can also occur at the beginning of words, like in civil, which becomes shibble, or at the end, as in leherj, as we saw earlier.
So let's have a look at some of the vowels and the differences that we have that distinguish Irish English. We'll use some lexical sets to better understand what kind of sound we're talking about and in which words it's used. So with monophthongs, the historical is realized more open as a, so we have man. The sound is realized with a longer, so we have calm, and minimal pairs can be distinguished based on quantity difference, so we have some and some. The retention of e in words that along e, that in words that otherwise would be pronounced with e, so in the fleece set. Received pronunciation of this open back vowel becomes unrounded, like in General American, so the pronunciation of lot as more back. The sound is realized more centralized, so instead of saying fun, we can have fun. There is the unstressed E sound that becomes with the sound of the schwa, so we have rabbit instead of rabbit. Then inside the same lexical set, we can have various differences. So, for example, the word father can be pronounced differently with more back or central open vowels. And the dress set uses the open e, is instead used with the e, uses the e in more traditional dialects, and with traditional we usually mean part of the south. Then there are diphthongs, so face and goat. Instead of using this diphthongized sound, we have monophthongs, so o, a long o and long e, respectively. So we have for day, it's pronounced de, gate, gate. But this, however, alternates with the diphthongs, and we actually see the difference in how it's changing nowadays. The I diphthong is stereotypically pronounced as oi in rural and southern areas, so toy is both for toy and toy. And lastly, we consider the diphthong au, which is more open with o. So I hope I gave a general overview, even if the pronunciation maybe isn't the best. Irish had a strong influence on Irish English because of its history, because of the mixing of these languages, as we have previously seen. So it obviously had a lot of impact, not only on the phonology, but also on the vocabulary and lexis. So, for example, the word for prime minister in Irish is Taoiseach. And it is used, and they do not say the prime minister, but they use this Irish word. The National Police Service is called Gardaí, as you've seen in the video in the second slide. Kitter is a word for a left-handed person. Omadon comes also from Irish and means fool, and these words are more dialectal, maybe obsolete in some ways, but still used. And there is also the use of the diminutive suffix in, so girlin means small, young girl.
Let's now look at how Irish has influenced some grammatical features of Irish English. First of all, Irish English varieties are characterized by a use of the progressive form. So rather than say, what is it that you want, you might hear an Irish person say, what is it that you're wanting? The gerund might also be preceded by after, and this is especially true in the Dublin English variety, to replace, for example, the present perfect. So they might say, you look like you're after seeing a ghost, instead of you look like you've just seen a ghost. As far as offers are concerned, shall is usually replaced by will. So somebody might ask you, will I get you another cup of tea? Used to usually loses its preposition to, and some speakers might realize aren't as amped. An interesting aspect is the fact that the auxiliary in the perfect aspect is changed. So we do not have the auxiliary to have, but to be. So the correct way to say that Seamus has fallen would be Seamus is fallen. The Irish also seem to be quite fond of emphatic constructs. So when asking questions, they may want to stress who is the person who is directly involved in the action. So they might ask, is it yourself who is in that photo? And this is also true of answers. In fact, Irish speakers tend not to reply using yes or no short answers, but to the question, is it yourself who is in that photo? They would answer, it is me. Possessive constructions also display patterns of influence from Irish. In Gaelic, possessive constructs are created using the verb to be, then followed by an object, the main verb, and a prepositional possessive, which is usually at or from. And as a result, in Irish English varieties, we have sentences like, I have my work done, saying that the work you had to carry out has been carried out in its entirety. And these are all features which were, this feature characterized, was also typical of English of the past, and in fact it was used in the 1500s, the 1600s, and the 1800s. There are instances of it in William Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, and this takes me to my next point, which is conservatism. By conservatism, linguists and scholars mean the retention of linguistic features which were typical of past varieties of English. As a matter of fact, in standard Irish English, some speakers may retain elements of the early modern vernacular. So rather than just say it is, they could say tis, and instead of it isn't, they could say tisn't. This might be linked to the fact that Ireland was, and to some extent still is, a predominantly rural society, a conservative one, and this element of, in this aspect, was also translated, can also be found in how languages are perceived in Ireland. It's also interesting to note that Standard Irish English also share similarities with Old English, but more of this later.
So Dublin English is spoken, of course, in the capital, and we can look at two varieties because scholars thought that Dublin English can be divided into local Dublin English and non-local Dublin English, because also the city, in a way, for sociological reasons and economic reasons, is divided into the north and the south. So the northern part is where local Dublin English is spoken, and it's a group of people where there is a stronger identification with the traditional, conservative, rural, Christian Dublin life, while non-local Dublin English is spoken in the southern part and then spreads thanks to communication, because this is an area where there is the Trinity College, there is the Royal Dublin Society with important cultural events, but it's also the area of RTE, so the news, the channel of the news. And this is an area where there is more changing, more developing of the language towards new accents. It really does want to sound, for various reasons, more metropolitan and in a way stand out from a more rural idea of what Ireland sounds like. And so non-local Dublin English can also be further divided into mainstream Dublin English, which is spoken by a much wider group of people, and new or advanced Dublin English, which was for a period of time also called Dort Speak, that we will see later on. So some of the features of local Dublin English and mainstream, which is a bigger group of non-local Dublin English, there are differences between these two. The most evident one is the fact that mainstream Dublin English is rhotic, while local Dublin English is not rhotic. Also, mainstream Dublin English uses dental stops for fricatives, while local Dublin English uses alveolar stops. So in the sounds of this is this and think, as we were seeing also before with the standard. There is telenation with mainstream Dublin English, so night, for example. There is yod dropping, so the sound of news is news. As we were saying before, this is at times used, at times not used in standard Irish English, the yod dropping. There is also, for example, silent ow fronting for the sound of house. There's the low central a sound. While local Dublin English, as I said, is weakly rhotic, which is the biggest distinction. There is the centralization of the diphthong I, long vowels, for example, with school, it's pronounced with school. But the differences that we hear with local Dublin English become very obvious when we look at the Dublin vowel shift, because local Dublin English basically does not really suffered or, in a way, evolved through the Dublin vowel shift, which instead is felt in mainstream Dublin English. So the Dublin vowel shift is shift in the sound of vowels that started in the 70s, but then was established in the late 1980s and the 1990s. And we can have a look at some of the main features. So there is the retraction of diphthongs with low back. So the diphthong I is retracted, so instead of saying time, it goes back, so it's time. There is raising of low back vowels in the thought lexical set, for example. So instead of saying toy, it's more toy, more open, as with thought and law, as you can see also in the chart on the side. The goat diphthong we were seeing before with the standard of Irish English, how this diphthong at time is monophthong. With the Dublin vowel shift from the diphthong O, it becomes more central with the schwa O. There is also the fronting of the goose vowel, so the sound goose is with the U sound, as in book. And there is an increased use of retroflex R and velarized L. So, as I said, of course, this is erotic variety. Dublin vowel shift happened in Dublin because it became a very, very wealthy city, and this also influenced strongly the language, as we will see with the next slide. So the vowel shift happened, as I said, also for economic, sociological reasons, and it is also the reason why local Dublin English sounds different from non-local Dublin English. And we can look at an accent, a variety that was used in the southern part of Dublin for set number of years, that is called Dordspeak or Dublin 4, which is a name that was coined to refer to this variety that was used in the part served by the Dublin area rapid transit system. And it can also be called D4 accent because D4 is the postal code of that area. What Dordspeak did was bring the vowel shift to its greatest extent. So every single one of the features of the Dublin vowel shift appear in Dordspeak. But before looking at the features, let's look at the years in which this happened. So Dordspeak started being started being spoken in a more or less natural way between 1995 and 2007, if we can put such limits. So the 90s are also called the Celtic Tiger years because of the economic boom of Ireland. It was extremely wealthy, and Dublin as well became such an important metropolis. And this means also that the people wanted to sound different and did not want to be associated with a more rural idea of Ireland. And through this process of dissociation, they tried to make their phonemes sound different from the one that, for example, local Dublin English has, but they brought it to the extreme consequences of this. And by some, it is now called a natural process because people who lived in Dublin or who went to Dublin for a few years would come back to their city and speak Dordspeak. But even if that wasn't their own accent, so for example, if they were drunk, they would start speaking their own accent of the city, their own city, the native city, and not Dordspeak. So it really is connected to this idea of dissociation and economic boom. So they stopped using it. It died out in time, and the last year that we can say this phenomenon ended with is 2007, because in 2008 then there was the economic crisis that started in the US and then came to Europe and to Ireland as well. So Dordspeak at the time, and moreover now, has always been ridiculed by people who were not using it. So there is, for example, this sentence, a glass of harp in the bar, and they would, this is the transcription, where every single one of the vowels is stressed through the Dublin vowel shift, and it sounds very ridiculous if someone actually speaks like that. So if you're looking at the main features of the of Dort speak, we can have the back vowel raising. So instead of back, it goes back in back. The dress set, so it goes from the sound to goat diphthongization that I explained before with the Dublin vowel shift. The tensing of the E, happy, yaw deletion. So some of these features are also similar to the features of American English, for example, happy tensing, but also velarized L, because and retroflex R, but also T flapping, so for example, letter. And some said that Dort speak and some of these features came from people watching Friends a lot, for example, that uses, of course, an American accent, and so that came into these accents spoken in Dublin. We have retroflex R, mouth fronting, but also a change in vocabulary and slang. So Dort speak started to generate its own vocabulary, its own slang. They did not want to use Christian slang anymore because they thought they related them to this, again, idea of rural, old conservative Ireland that they did not want to have anymore. The term colchi was replaced by the term bogger to talk about people who came from outside of Dublin. But again, some of these changes did not survive after, let's say, 2007, because, for example, all of these words are still used, and not all of these features in phonemic terms actually did survive. Where they survive is in advertisement, for example, but usually in a satirical way. And there is a column, for example, in the Irish Times of this fictional character who is supposedly a rugby player, so he's really posh, and he is very rich, and he's cheated on his wife, so he has a lot of terrible characteristics, and the person who, the author of this character who created him and really hates him, decided that he should speak with a Dort speak accent. And this is a podcast that is still on, and so they're making fun not only of the stereotype of the rugby player, successful or not, but also of the accent. Because it is related to this idea of poshness that is, though, very forced. However, some of these features of the Dublin vowel shift that was actually much more used by the female population than the male population is still present today with advanced Dublin English. And the main features that survived are the change from a to in the dress set, the back retraction, the goose fronting, the diphthong goat as goat, and the retroflex are, of course, it is still rounded. And the reason why the Dublin vowel shift spread also outside of Dublin was because, as I said, in the southern part there is the news channel that, of course, started using the Dublin vowel shift, and so it was broadcast all over Ireland, and so that's how the media had such an important function in spreading this new variety.
Let's now focus our attention on Ulster English, but first of all, what is Ulster? Ulster is a historic Irish province which is larger than today's political Northern Ireland, and as a matter of fact, Northern Ireland only contains 6 of Ulster's 9 provinces. As Caterina said, with the plantations of 1609, a number of Scots-speaking colonists from southwest Scotland arrived, as well as colonists from the North and West Midlands. As far as Irish Englishes are concerned, Ulster English represents a unique contribution for its blend of Scots, Irish, and archaic English. I will now focus briefly on the main features of Ulster English. These, for example, some of them are common to all Irish Englishes, or most of them at least. So Ulster English is a rhotic variety, meaning that the R sound is pronounced in all positions, at the end of words, but also in between. So water, for example, and earn, as in the verb to earn. A phenomenon which is characteristic of Ulster is the so-called Ulster lengthening of the letter E as in may, E as in bed, A as in hat, and O as in not. And this change occurs in monosyllabic words ending with a consonant other than the P, T, K, and Ch sound. So here we have an example. Raid, the diphthong is also affected, but let's just take a look at vowel length. Raid becomes raid, because it's a monosyllabic word which does not end in P, T, K, or Ch. There is also no opposition between the E sound and the A sound, so this sound is neutralized, this opposition. So the verb beg and the noun bag are both pronounced beg, and again, there is another instance of Ulster lengthening here. There is also no opposition between long U and short U, so a speaker might decide to pronounce both in the same way. And the diphthong A can be pronounced in two ways. It can be pronounced as the open long monophthong in words like day, so open syllables, so day becomes day, or as a centering diphthong in words which do not end with an open syllable. So face, here we have in Ulster English a centering diphthong, and so the word is pronounced fierce. Usually speakers of the Ulster variety only employ clear L when pronouncing the letter L, and there is retention of the labiovelar fricative in WH words, so words like whale and whistle would be pronounced as whale and whistle. And to conclude, let's take a look at the vocabulary and expressions which are used in Ulster English. First of all, there seems to be a propensity for the use of the definite article. So if you're at the pub and you see that your friend is drunk, you should say he's on the drink rather than he's drunk. Ulster English is also characterized by the use of the linking phrase the way to connect sentences. So you could hear, for example, a sentence like, I worked all Friday the way I could go to the lake on Saturday, meaning so that I could go to the lake on Saturday. And there are expressions like, I'm not at myself, meaning that you're not feeling well. The influence of Scots can be felt in some words, in part of its vocabulary. So, for example, Ulster English still uses words like lum, meaning chimney, ken, meaning no, and ava, meaning at all. And let's go back to what I said earlier about conservatism, because elements of past varieties are indeed still present in Ulster English. So the demonstratives thon and thonda are still used, and they're rather similar to the Elizabethan demonstratives yon, yonda. There is also the use of Shakespearean words, but this is true generally of all Englishes, but especially in Ulster English. So we have words like vouch, warrant, and perish. Interestingly enough, some words which were used in Elizabethan times have changed their meaning today, but Ulster English is characterized by a retention of that same Elizabethan meaning. So doubt is used to say believe, backward means shy, and able means fit. Another interesting thing is the fact that whenever is used to talk about single actions. So you might hear somebody say, whenever my son was born, but let's say that that son was born only once, not more than once. And let's end with a piece of trivia, I think. Ulster English, again, is characterized by similarities with Old English, and this aspect was especially invaluable for some writers, one of them being Seamus Heaney. He was a poet from Northern Ireland. He died fairly recently, and he decided to embark on a literary journey, let's say, because he wanted to translate the epic poem Beowulf. And when he did that, he decided that he would use dialects, rural dialects from the north of Ulster, because of the many similarities they share with Old English. And so, with Ulster English, our journey through the Emerald Isle reaches its end. We hope that you found it interesting, thought-provoking, and that you might have learned something new about Ireland, its history, and its linguistic variety. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.